Isaac Sarason is a skilled hacker, formerly employed by British Telecom-Sprint. When his health failed, Isaac did the only thing he could think of. He ran. A burqa-wearing doctor known as Fatima took pity on Isaac and helped him make his way to the mysterious Star X line. At the end of all hope, they found the Star X line and the slim promise that the enigmatic beings behind the Star X could save Isaac from the implants which destroyed his life. What do you do when those who saved you have recorded everything you are? What do you do when your every action is tracked by the Keylogger? Colbyjack.net is proud to present Firmware Keylogger, the third installment of Firmware by Colbytrax. Episode 47 01-10-01 Simeon. Servers were supposed to be indistinguishable once you got past the piddling details of physical architecture and processor limitations. When one was inside a server, it shouldn't feel any different from any other server in the world with the same processing power. Then why did the Kojinsha CS54L server, buried beneath the ancient Faculty of Engineering Building 12, which was located just inside the Asano South Gate of the University of Edo, feel so different? As I checked the assets at my disposal, I realized that different wasn't quite the right word. It was as if the Kojinsha CS54L was alive. If it were possible for a server to feel like a body, that server would have to be based on the design structure of the CS54L. It was an initially overwhelming feeling as I expanded my data structures to take advantage of the vast spaces available for my work. When Kuan, the fallen simian leader of the Wild Hunt, first presented me with the server I now lived in, all I could obsess about was the fact that I would be in a server at the same university which had created the AI known as Angel 19 Metatron in the decades before the signing of the city charter. I had no hope that there would be anything left of Metatron. The discovery of the power she held over all levels of Nipponese life and culture had proven too much for the politicians of the time. They had believed they controlled the destiny of their island nation. Any data contrary to that truth had to be erased from the historical record. When they realized how wrong they had been, they had demanded her removal from the systems which controlled Nippon from Hokkaido to Okinawa. It was her removal which led to the creation of the Akagi protocols, and from them came the Culpeper method, which, most probably, had been first used to create Koenig, and probably his minion AIs. As for the children of Isaac Sarason's mind, Samuel, Ishmael, Samil, and myself, the middle-seeking Simeon, there was no doubt that the Culpeper method had been used. The Akagi protocols were used to create Rutsuko, who filled Metatron's figurative shoes without a note of public interest and without the least ripple in the stressed social fabric of the post-Kaiju Akira recovery period. Though in the political press, you'd have thought the leading politicians of the era had both destroyed Metatron and written the code behind the Akagi protocols themselves. In the city, where conspiracy theories grew like mushrooms on kitchen waste, there were legends bandied about college campuses which claimed Metatron had not been destroyed. She had not been taken offline. She had simply changed names and pretended to be someone else. Their reasoning was very simplistic. Based on current techniques employed in the Culpeper method of creating AIs, it took roughly 3 months to create an AI from the deep neural network mapping of a human mind. 3 long months to create a faux mind which was capable of passing any Turing test their progenitor could pass. That's right. It was possible for a human to fail the default test of whether they were a living being or a computer pretending to be a human. That was why the Turing test wasn't used to confirm the accuracy of an AI's mapping of the behaviors of its progenitor. Instead, simulations of environments were used to prove the AI was acting in a manner consistent with its progenitor. Naturally, all of this led to claims of nefarious plans and conspiracies which blossomed regularly around late-night cups of coffee. The basic conspiracy theories were based on 3 points. First, since it took upwards of 3 months at the present time to create an accurate counterfeit of an individual's mental processes, and Ritsuko went live only a month after Metatron was ordered shut down, it was obvious something fishy was going on. Second, as Metatron's replacement, Ritsuko was based on untried technologies, and the deployment went too seamlessly. This was also suspect. Surely an operation to completely readjust the operation of a complex modern economy couldn't be handled without some form of disruption. Third point in the conspiracy theory quiver was the fact that the ever-volatile Tokyo Stock Exchange showed no movement outside of the market's always wider than normal daily variance during the rollout of Ritsuko. It was as if nothing had happened. That was what bugged them the most. There was no drama to the rollout of Ritsuko. If a similar technological achievement had happened in the city, there would have been books and movies and cartoons and souvenirs and all the drama associated with the death of one world and the emergence of another. It was the lack of drama which bothered foreigners who examined the transition from rule by Angel 19 Metatron to management by Ritsuko. "Here," the conspiracy nuts said, "here we have a newly emergent technology being rushed into production with no negative effects, with no launching issues. Hell, every time I create a new program using tools designed before I was born, I have to spend hours hunting down bugs in the code. There is no way they could have created an AI from scratch and integrated it into the Nipponese control network without something going wrong." Naturally, this is where the hypothetical Nipponese official would bow ever so gently, smile ever so enigmatically, and turn to her secretary, who would come forward and comment with all sincerity that he would be happy to examine any data the conspiracy nut had regarding the claims. The secretary to the official would say with a tight smile, "I beg the forgiveness of the esteemed individual for the creativity and skill of the humble technicians who did what was asked of them by their empress. May the chrysanthemum throne someday find the sincerity necessary to apologize for having competent citizens." Basically, the Shinka-era version of the Igrish, "Would you mind fracking off?" It was easy to see the problem with believing in the spontaneous creation of the AI known as Ritsuko. But that would have been ignoring the multi-century body of work produced by the IBA laboratories, which first led to Angel 19 Metatron, and then, decades later, to the AI triumvirate known as Ritsuko. To be honest, even at my most studious, I was never able to follow the research papers published by IBA laboratories. They were densely layered examples of the bleeding edge of technology. All I knew for sure was that anything which came from their lab, which was in a form which could be easily absorbed, was also from a paper at least 5 years old. That was how brilliant they are. If you didn't have a pet research-oriented PhD to pre-digest the paper for you on staff, you'd have to wait half a decade for someone to toss off the information in an aside, in an article, in a trade journal, read by hacks attempting to discover what their betters were up to. Even with my newly enhanced attention span, I still couldn't make it past the titles of even their most ancient research papers. Little gems like adaptation techniques for integrating genetic programming and reinforcement learning for real robots, analog circuit design with a variable length chromosome, and inference of a gene regulatory network by means of interactive evolutionary computing. All cried out, "Read me! I am important!" while my mind tried to distract me with little details. Little details like what it was I was supposed to be doing in this strange server, finding a way to create sexual reproduction for AIs of my line, which appeared more and more hopeless as I came to grip with all the variables inherent in reproduction. Or why the Kojinsha server felt so different. As I said before, the Kojinsha CS54L server was a strange beast. When I first awoke, I had spent a few minutes extracting my base code structure and had laid it out across a wide swath of the server, which appeared to have the computational architecture I needed. Okay, laid out isn't quite accurate, but it was the closest way I could describe what happened next. I had laid the data structure out like a dress on a tailor's table. I had prepared a series of analysis algorithms which would take advantage of the server architecture I had at my disposal. The idea was to be as efficient as possible, by using routines hardwired into the processors of the server. At this point, I knew I had 64 processors available to take on the load. I was distracted for a few moments by a bit of extreme navel-gazing, as I am wont to do. And when I returned, I found there were now 4,096 processors assigned to the task. That's right, there were now 64 squared worth of processors assigned to the analysis of my base architecture. 64 squared minus 64 processors, which I didn't even know existed when I laid out the problem. Okay, this wasn't a problem. Having access to 64 times the assets I had started with wasn't a bad thing. According to my initial estimations of the time it would take to complete the initial mapping of my digital genome, the problem would have taken approximately a week's worth of processing time with the assets I woke to in the CS54L. Now, with the addition of over 4,000 processors, the time to complete theoretically should be a little less than 3 hours. That's if the process of analyzing my digital genome could be parallelized completely. I had already optimized the problem of analyzing my base structure to the best of my ability and wasn't sure the additional resources would actually be more than marginally useful. To be honest, optimizing parallel computing processes had never been one of my strong suits. I was used to the fact that most programs didn't use enough resources on a system for there to be much call for deep analysis of the best manner to break up a task to take advantage of a vast number of processors all working together. When I did encounter such a problem at BTS, which I only encountered after joining Murray's team, I would walk down 2 cubicles to Chu's station and ask her to work her magic. Chu was a genius who loved figuring out how to optimize the unoptimizable. With her around, I never had to learn more than the basics of task parallelization. As it was, I was now faced with access to more processors than I had ever used on a single problem before. And I wasn't sure the extra processors would actually give me a scalar increase in productivity. What it came down to was bottlenecks. In every process, there was a choke point. Many times there was more than one. In the case of the digital genome analysis problem, there were 23 separate processes which served as bottlenecks. Each one would stop all further work until they had been completed. In each case, the problem was of such complexity that less than a handful of processors could worry away at the problem, while the remaining processes remained inactive while they waited upon the results of the bottleneck to resolve. So, while it would be nice to think that throwing more processors at the problem would yield scalable results, I was hard-pressed to believe they would bring the operation time of the scan to under 24 hours. What was really frustrating was that of the 24 hours it would take, 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 27 seconds worth of processing time would be spent on bottlenecks. Basically, what would happen is that everything except the bottlenecks would be computed, and then approximately one processor in 10 would crunch away at the bottlenecks until they were solved. When they were done, a couple dozen seconds of computational time would be burned to finish the initial mapping of my digital genome. Well, at least a day would be better than a week. I hit the start button and wondered how I should spend my time. While I had promised Kawan I would be able to create a method of sexual reproduction for him, and by extension myself, and the entire simian line, I was starting to think I was better at imagining cool things and not so good at actually doing them. It was one of a number of flaws inherent in the children of Isaac Sarason. You'd think we'd learn that we were better at coming up with things to do than we were at following through. But then again, wasn't that just the nature of being mortal and, more importantly, human? We could dream and delude ourselves about what we could and couldn't do, as well as any person who had walked the world. That should be part of the Turing test. Can the AI delude itself into thinking it can do something it has no idea how to accomplish? If it could delude itself into attempting the impossible and making a mess of things, it too was a real boy. Here was the rub of it. I was in a server owned by a university which was a world leader in information sciences, engineering, and early pioneers in the design and implementation of AIs which had and still do run an entire nation. And I couldn't even break the code language used by academics to communicate with each other. I was sure there were papers which documented every last bit of code logic I needed in order to create a system of reproduction for an AI on the very network I was hiding on. But I couldn't understand them. It wasn't that my understanding of Igrish wasn't up to reading the texts, or that translations from Nipponese would be all that hard to find. While machine language translation of poetry and fiction was an ever-elusive target for linguists, the translation of dense technical language was another thing altogether. Where the language was not ambiguous, the machines found translation to be extremely simplistic. No, the problem came down to the code language used within the scientific community to transmit meaning between one another. I had never had a gift for parsing meaning from the strange version of language I first encountered in papers I was forced to read and prepare in graduate school. It took me a lot longer to complete my thesis than it should have, as I had trouble finding the right scholarly word to use. In the end, I hired a professional research editor to help me find the correct words to state my findings in. Don't even think about asking me about the pain of my thesis defense. Firmware Keylogger begins where Firmware Proxy ends, which in turn followed on the heels of Firmware Hijacked. Firmware Hijacked, Proxy, and Keylogger are all available in ebook versions from our store at shop.Colbyjack.net, Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and Smashwords.com. Just search for Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. I'm the only one. A complete audiobook version of both Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and soon Keylogger is available for download through our shop as well. If you don't need any stuff, but would like to support our work, drop on by Colbyjack.net and hit the pretty little donate button conveniently located on the right-hand side of the blog roll. Firmware Keylogger is released under a Creative Commons, non-commercial, attribution, share-alike license. Do what you want with it. Just don't sell it, and always tell people where it came from. If you received this from a friend and want more information about Colbyjack.net and our split personality website, just drop on over to Colbyjack.net and select either the audio or visual side. The audio side carries our podcast, while the visual side carries our writings. Whichever side catches your fancy is fine with us. We're of two minds about the whole thing anyway. I do mostly Twitter, so if you do the tweets and want to follow me, I'm Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. Thank you once again. Remember to be fabulous and have a wonderful week.